Most men think the moment a woman disrespects them, they have only two choices. They either react with anger or continue chasing her in the hope that things will improve. Both choices are driven by emotion, and both quietly reduce a man's value. The real power begins when you understand something most people never learn. Every time you reward repeated disrespect with your attention, you teach the other person that your standards can be ignored without consequences. The psychology behind ignoring a woman is not about making her jealous or forcing her to chase you. It is about refusing to invest your time, energy, and emotions where respect no longer exists. Imagine this. A woman constantly dismisses your opinions, ignores your efforts, or only gives you attention when it benefits her. Most men immediately try harder. They send longer messages. They explain themselves again. They become more available, believing that greater effort will eventually earn greater respect. But human nature often works differently. When people discover that they can repeatedly disrespect you without losing access to your attention, they begin to see that attention as something ordinary instead of valuable. Attention is one of the most valuable things you own because once you give your time and emotional energy away, you can never get them back. That is why emotionally mature people are careful about where they invest them. They understand that respect must always come before attention. If respect disappears while attention remains unlimited, the balance of the relationship slowly begins to disappear as well. This is why ignoring a woman after repeated disrespect is not an act of revenge. It is an act of self-respect. There is an important difference. Revenge is focused on changing another person's emotions. Self-respect is focused on protecting your own peace. When your silence is motivated by anger, you are still emotionally attached to the situation. But when your silence comes from calm self-control, you are no longer trying to control anyone. You are simply refusing to reward behavior that goes against your values. Many men confuse kindness with endless tolerance. They believe that accepting every form of disrespect proves loyalty or patience. In reality, patience without boundaries often teaches people that your limits do not exist. Every healthy relationship depends on mutual respect. The moment one person repeatedly crosses that line, while the other continues rewarding it with attention, the relationship begins moving in an unhealthy direction. Think about people who naturally command respect wherever they go. They rarely raise their voices. They rarely argue to prove their value. They simply have standards. If someone consistently treats them without respect, they quietly reduce their attention and move their energy elsewhere. They do not announce it. They do not threaten anyone. Their actions communicate something much stronger than emotional words ever could. They show that access to their time is earned through mutual respect. This is where emotional control becomes essential. When a woman disrespects you, your emotions will tempt you to react immediately. You will want to defend yourself, prove your point, or demand an explanation. But emotional reactions often satisfy your feelings while damaging your position. Calm decisions protect both your dignity and your future. Sometimes saying less communicates far more than saying everything. There is also a psychological truth that many people overlook. People naturally become more careful with what they believe they can lose. If your attention is always available regardless of how they behave, they rarely feel the need to value it. But when they realize that disrespect leads to distance instead of arguments, they begin to understand that your attention is connected to your standards. This is not about creating fear through manipulation. It is about creating respect through consistency. Ignoring a woman should never be your first response to a simple disagreement or misunderstanding. Healthy relationships require honest communication and mutual effort. But when disrespect becomes a repeated pattern, instead of an isolated mistake, continuing to reward that behavior only weakens your own position. There comes a point where protecting your self-respect becomes more important than protecting someone's temporary approval. Always remember that the strongest man is not the one who can make people fear his anger. The strongest man is the one whose standards are so clear that people know disrespect will never be rewarded with more attention. His silence is calm, his actions are consistent, and his decisions are guided by self-respect instead of emotion. And once people realize that disrespect costs them access to your time and attention, they begin to understand why calm silence is often far more powerful than emotional confrontation. The moment you stop rewarding disrespect with your attention, you discover a lesson that is even more powerful. You realize that not every situation deserves your words. Many people believe respect is earned by winning arguments, defending every accusation, or proving themselves in every disagreement. But life teaches a different lesson. The person who feels the need to explain himself constantly often gives away more power than he realizes. Silence, when guided by confidence instead of pride, has a way of communicating strength that endless arguments never can. Imagine a situation where a woman speaks to you with repeated disrespect. Your first instinct might be to correct her, defend yourself, or convince her that she is wrong. You may believe that if you simply find the right words, everything will change. But ask yourself this question. If someone has already decided not to respect your words, what makes you think adding more words will suddenly create respect? Respect is rarely built through emotional debates. It is built through consistent standards and calm behavior. Many men lose control the moment they feel disrespected. Their voice becomes louder. Their emotions take over. They send long messages trying to explain every detail of the situation. They argue point after point, hoping the other person will finally understand their value. Unfortunately, the opposite often happens. The more emotionally desperate the conversation becomes, the more confidence begins to disappear. What started as an attempt to gain respect slowly becomes an attempt to gain approval. There is a reason emotionally disciplined people rarely rush into arguments. They understand that emotions can cloud judgment. When your pride is hurt, your first reaction is rarely your wisest one. Anger wants immediate satisfaction. Confidence is willing to wait. Anger wants to win the moment. Confidence wants to protect character. That difference changes everything. Silence should never be confused with weakness. Weakness remains silent because it is afraid to speak. Strength remains silent because it knows speaking is not always necessary. There are moments when calm silence communicates more than an hour of emotional explanation. It shows that your peace is not controlled by another person's behavior. It shows that your standards remain steady, even when someone else loses theirs. This does not mean you avoid honest communication. In every healthy relationship, respectful conversation is essential. If there is a misunderstanding, address it with honesty and maturity. If someone makes a mistake once, give room for understanding. But when disrespect becomes a repeated pattern instead of an isolated moment, continuing the same argument over and over rarely creates a different result. At that point, your actions become far more meaningful than your words. Think about the people who naturally command respect. They do not feel the need to respond to every criticism. They do not argue with every opinion. They choose carefully where their attention goes because they understand that attention is valuable. They know that giving endless energy to someone who repeatedly ignores their boundaries only weakens those boundaries further. There is also a powerful psychological principle at work. When every insult receives an emotional reaction, the other person learns that they can easily control your emotions. They know exactly which words will upset you and exactly how you will respond. But when you remain calm, respectful, and emotionally balanced, that pattern is broken. Your self-control makes you less predictable, and people naturally become more careful when they realize they cannot easily control your reactions. Ignoring a woman after repeated disrespect is not about making her feel guilty or anxious. It is about refusing to participate in unhealthy patterns. It is choosing peace over unnecessary conflict. It is recognizing that your dignity is more valuable than winning one emotional argument. Sometimes the strongest response is not proving that you are right. Sometimes it is quietly refusing to continue a conversation that no longer contains mutual respect. Remember that silence alone is not enough. Silence without self-respect is simply avoidance. Silence becomes powerful only when it is supported by clear boundaries and consistent actions. If you remain silent today, but continue accepting the same disrespect tomorrow, nothing has changed. Your silence must reflect your standards. It must show that your attention is no longer available to behavior that repeatedly violates your values. People often remember calm confidence far longer than emotional confrontation. They remember the person who remained composed while everyone else was reacting. They remember the person who protected his dignity without creating unnecessary drama. That kind of emotional discipline cannot be imitated for long because it comes from genuine self-control, not temporary pride. And when your silence is supported by unwavering standards instead of wounded emotions, people begin to understand that respect is the only path to earning your time, attention, and presence. When you stop rewarding disrespect with your attention and learn to remain calm instead of reacting emotionally, something important begins to happen. Your focus shifts away from trying to change another person's behavior and toward improving your own life. This is where many people make a life-changing discovery. The strongest position is never created by making someone depend on you. It is created by building a life that does not depend on constant approval from anyone else. The more purpose you build into your own life, the more valuable your presence naturally becomes. Many men make the mistake of allowing one relationship to become the center of their world. Their goals begin to fade. Their hobbies disappear. Their discipline becomes inconsistent. Every decision starts revolving around one person. They constantly wonder when she will call, when she will reply, or whether she still feels the same. Without realizing it, they slowly stop building themselves. The problem is not that they care too much. The problem is that they have forgotten to care about their own future with the same intensity. Ignoring a woman after repeated disrespect is not simply about creating distance. It is about redirecting your energy. Instead of investing your time in endless arguments or chasing attention that is no longer freely given, invest that same energy into becoming stronger, wiser, and more disciplined. Every hour spent trying to force respect from someone else is an hour that could have been spent earning respect from yourself. People naturally value what is connected to purpose. When someone has meaningful goals, they become more selective with their time because they understand its value. They cannot spend every day trying to fix situations that only the other person has the power to change. They understand that while relationships are important, purpose gives those relationships stability. Without purpose, emotional reactions begin to control every decision. Imagine two men facing the same situation. Both experience repeated disrespect from a woman they care about. The first man abandons his routine, loses sleep, constantly checks his phone, and spends every day searching for answers. The second man communicates respectfully, sets clear boundaries, and then returns his attention to his responsibilities, his health, his work, and his personal growth. Which one appears stronger? Not because he is pretending not to care, but because he refuses to let one situation consume his entire identity. This is the psychology that many people fail to understand. Attention becomes more valuable when it is connected to a meaningful life. If your schedule, your emotions, and your future are always available to anyone, regardless of how they treat you, your attention slowly loses its importance. But when your life has direction, your attention becomes something that must be earned through mutual respect, not expected through habit. There is also another benefit to building your own life. It allows you to see relationships more clearly. When your happiness depends entirely on one person, you begin overlooking behaviors that should concern you. You excuse repeated disrespect because you fear losing the relationship. But when your life is filled with purpose, you no longer make decisions from fear. You begin asking healthier questions. Does this relationship encourage mutual respect? Do our actions reflect genuine care? Are both people investing equally? Those questions become easier to answer because your judgment is no longer clouded by emotional dependence. This does not mean becoming emotionally unavailable or pretending that relationships do not matter. Strong relationships add meaning to life, but they should never replace your personal mission. A healthy relationship supports your growth instead of becoming a substitute for it. When both people continue improving themselves, respect grows naturally because neither person is relying on the other to create their identity. The people who command lasting respect are rarely those who demand it. They are the ones whose lives demonstrate discipline, consistency, and purpose. They remain calm under pressure because they know one difficult situation cannot destroy everything they have built. Their confidence comes from years of keeping promises to themselves, not from temporary praise or attention. That kind of confidence is difficult to shake because it is rooted in daily habits rather than changing emotions. Remember, the goal is never to make someone fear losing you through manipulation. The goal is to become someone who values his own time so highly that he refuses to waste it where respect no longer exists. When your life is driven by purpose, walking away from repeated disrespect becomes an act of wisdom, not anger. You no longer chase people who refuse to value your presence because your energy is already invested in building a future that reflects your principles. And when your life becomes your greatest priority, people begin to understand that your respect cannot be bought with empty words. It can only be earned through consistent actions and genuine character. The moment you begin building a life with purpose, you also begin to understand something that many people learn too late. Confidence without boundaries eventually disappears. You can be disciplined, successful, and emotionally strong, but if you continue allowing repeated disrespect simply because you are afraid of losing someone, your confidence will slowly be replaced by frustration. This is why boundaries are not walls designed to push people away. They are standards designed to protect your self-respect. Without them, even the strongest person can gradually lose sight of his own value. Many men believe setting boundaries means becoming cold, distant, or controlling. They think that saying no or stepping away from repeated disrespect will make them appear harsh. But healthy boundaries are not about controlling another person. They are about controlling what you are willing to accept in your own life. There is an important difference. You cannot decide how someone else will behave, but you can decide whether that behavior will continue receiving your time, attention, and emotional investment. Imagine a woman who repeatedly speaks to you without respect, ignores your feelings whenever it benefits her, or constantly crosses lines that you have already communicated calmly. The first time it happens, a respectful conversation may solve the problem. The second time, patience may still be appropriate. But when the same pattern continues again and again, and your response is always more tolerance, something dangerous begins to happen. You unintentionally teach people that your boundaries are only suggestions, not standards. People often pay more attention to what you tolerate than to what you say. You can speak about self-respect for hours, but if your actions show that you accept repeated disrespect without changing your behavior, your words lose their meaning. Real boundaries are communicated through consistent action. They quietly demonstrate that respect is not optional for anyone who wants a place in your life. This is one of the reasons ignoring a woman after repeated disrespect can become an act of emotional maturity rather than emotional revenge. You are not trying to make her anxious. You are not trying to make her chase you. You are simply refusing to continue investing in a pattern that repeatedly damages mutual respect. Your silence is no longer a reaction. It becomes a decision based on principle. Fear is often the greatest enemy of healthy boundaries. The fear of losing someone causes many people to accept behavior they know is unhealthy. They tell themselves that things will improve if they are just a little more patient, a little more understanding, or a little more available. While patience is a valuable quality, patience without limits often turns into self-neglect. A relationship cannot become healthy if one person keeps sacrificing dignity just to keep the other person comfortable. Think about those individuals who naturally command respect wherever they go. They are not respected because they threaten people. They are respected because they remain consistent. Their standards do not change depending on who they are speaking with. They treat others with kindness, but they expect kindness in return. They forgive honest mistakes, but they do not ignore repeated patterns of disrespect. Their consistency makes their character predictable, and predictable character creates trust. There is another psychological truth that many overlook. People become more careful when they realize your standards are real. If every act of disrespect is followed by another chance with no change in your response, there is little reason for the behavior to improve. But when they see that repeated disrespect calmly results in distance instead of arguments, they begin to understand that access to your life is connected to mutual respect. That realization often has a greater impact than any emotional confrontation ever could. Setting boundaries also protects your peace. Instead of spending endless hours wondering why someone keeps treating you poorly, you begin focusing on what you can actually control. You cannot force respect, but you can refuse to remain where respect no longer exists. That shift gives you freedom. Your energy is no longer consumed by convincing someone to value you. It is invested in becoming the kind of person who values himself enough to walk away from unhealthy patterns. Never confuse forgiveness with permission. You can forgive someone without continuing to accept repeated disrespect. You can wish someone well while recognizing that their behavior no longer belongs in your life. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom. Emotional maturity is knowing that protecting your self-respect is not an act of pride. It is an act of responsibility. And when your boundaries become stronger than your fear of losing someone, people begin to understand that respect is not something they can ignore if they expect to remain part of your life. Once your boundaries become stronger than your fear of losing someone, there is no longer a need to constantly prove your value. At that point, your reputation begins to speak before your words ever do. Many people believe respect is earned by telling others how confident they are or by demanding better treatment. But genuine respect is built in a much quieter way. It grows through consistent actions, disciplined habits, and the character you display every single day. The strongest message you will ever send is not the one you speak. It is the one you live. Think about the people who naturally command respect in every environment. They rarely waste time arguing over every opinion or defending themselves against every criticism. They understand that character is revealed through actions, not emotional reactions. When they are treated with respect, they respond with kindness. When they face repeated disrespect, they remain calm, uphold their standards, and refuse to lower themselves to unhealthy behavior. That consistency creates a reputation that people learn to respect. Many men make the mistake of trying to convince a woman of their value through constant explanations. They believe that if they just say the right words, she will finally understand who they are. But respect cannot be talked into existence. If your actions and your words do not match, people will always believe your actions. And if your actions consistently show self-respect, discipline, and emotional control, there is very little left to explain. Imagine facing repeated disrespect. One response is to become angry, argue, and demand recognition. The other response is to remain composed, protect your boundaries, and continue living according to your principles. Which response leaves the stronger impression? Emotional outbursts may create temporary attention, but calm consistency creates lasting respect. People may forget what you said during an argument, but they rarely forget the person who refused to compromise his dignity. This is where the psychology of ignoring a woman becomes deeper than simply creating distance. Ignoring repeated disrespect is not the destination. It is one action within a much larger pattern of character. If you ignore disrespect today, but tomorrow abandon your standards for attention, your silence loses its meaning. Your actions must always support your principles. Consistency is what transforms a single decision into a reputation. A strong reputation is built through countless small decisions. Showing up when you make a commitment. Speaking honestly even when it is difficult. Remaining calm under pressure. Refusing to gossip, manipulate, or seek revenge. Treating others with respect while expecting the same in return. These habits may seem ordinary, but together they create an image of someone who cannot easily be manipulated by emotion. That is the kind of strength people notice over time. There is another reason character matters so much. People naturally test what appears uncertain. If your values change depending on your emotions, others never know where your boundaries truly are. But when your behavior remains steady regardless of the situation, your standards become clear. You are respectful without becoming weak. You are confident without becoming arrogant. You are patient without becoming a person who accepts endless disrespect. That balance creates trust, and trust creates respect. Notice that truly respected people rarely chase approval. They do not need everyone to agree with them because their confidence comes from living according to their own principles. They understand that trying to please everyone often leads to pleasing no one, especially themselves. Instead of spending energy proving their worth, they spend that energy becoming more disciplined, more dependable, and more focused on their purpose. When a woman sees that your decisions are guided by principles instead of emotions, she begins to understand something important. Your attention cannot be controlled through disrespect. Your standards do not disappear because someone withdraws approval. You remain the same person whether you receive praise or criticism. That emotional stability is difficult to challenge because it is rooted in self-respect rather than temporary feelings. Always remember that reputation is something you earn long before you need it. It is built quietly while no one is paying attention. Every disciplined choice, every calm response, and every moment you refuse to compromise your values adds another brick to that foundation. Eventually, people begin to recognize that disrespecting you does not lead to arguments or emotional drama. It simply leads to losing access to someone who knows his own worth. And when your character becomes stronger than your desire to be accepted, people naturally learn that the only way to remain in your life is to meet the standard of mutual respect. The greatest mistake most men make is believing that the goal is to make people fear them. They think respect comes from intimidation, harsh words, or showing anger whenever they feel challenged. But fear created by anger is temporary. The moment your anger disappears, so does the fear. Lasting respect is built differently. It comes from becoming a person who cannot be manipulated by attention, rejection, or repeated disrespect. The strongest man in any room is not the one who controls everyone else. It is the one who has learned to control himself. Think back to the beginning of this journey. It started with learning not to reward disrespect with your attention. Then you discovered the strength of silence, the importance of building your own life, the necessity of strong boundaries, and the power of allowing your character to become your reputation. All of those lessons point toward one final truth. None of them were really about changing another person. They were all about changing you. Because the moment you master yourself, you become far more difficult for anyone else to control. Many men become emotionally trapped because they hand over control of their peace to another person. If a woman gives them attention, they feel confident. If she becomes distant, they lose sleep. If she praises them, they feel valuable. If she criticizes them, they begin questioning themselves. Without realizing it, they have placed someone else in charge of their emotional state. That is not confidence. That is dependence. And dependence always weakens your position. Real emotional freedom begins when your confidence is no longer controlled by another person's behavior. Imagine a woman who suddenly becomes cold after weeks of attention. If your entire identity depends on keeping her interested, you will immediately begin chasing explanations. You will overthink every conversation, replay every message, and wonder what you did wrong. But when your identity is built on discipline, purpose, and self-respect, your response changes completely. You communicate with maturity, but you refuse to abandon your dignity just to regain approval. You understand that your value does not rise and fall with another person's emotions. This is the deeper psychology behind ignoring a woman after repeated disrespect. It is not about creating emotional confusion or making someone anxious. It is about refusing to become emotionally controlled by unhealthy behavior. You stop giving your attention where respect has disappeared because you understand that your peace is worth protecting. That decision is not driven by pride. It is guided by wisdom. There is something powerful about a person who cannot be manipulated through praise or rejection. Such a person remains steady whether people admire him or criticize him. He does not become arrogant when he receives compliments, and he does not lose confidence when someone withdraws attention. His standards remain the same because they come from within, not from outside approval. That kind of emotional stability quietly commands respect because people recognize they cannot control him through emotional pressure. Many people ask how to make others fear disrespecting them. The better question is how to make others understand that disrespect has consequences without becoming disrespectful yourself. The answer is consistency. When people know that repeated disrespect will calmly result in losing access to your time, your attention, and your presence, they begin to understand that your standards are real. You do not threaten them. You do not seek revenge. You simply refuse to remain where mutual respect no longer exists. That quiet consistency is far more powerful than emotional confrontation because it reflects genuine self-respect. Remember that life will always bring people who test your patience. Some will underestimate you. Some will misunderstand you. Some relationships will grow stronger, while others will naturally come to an end. You cannot control those outcomes. What you can control is your response. Every difficult moment gives you an opportunity to strengthen your character instead of weakening it. Every act of disrespect gives you the opportunity to choose dignity instead of desperation. Every disappointment gives you the opportunity to return your focus to your purpose instead of chasing validation. The strongest reputation you can ever build is becoming known as someone whose values are not for sale. People know you are respectful, but they also know you will not tolerate repeated disrespect. They know you are kind, but they also know kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. They know you communicate honestly, but they also know you will quietly walk away from unhealthy patterns rather than argue endlessly. That balance creates a level of respect that anger can never produce. Never make your mission to control another person's emotions. Make your mission to become the kind of person who is impossible to control through emotions. When your peace is protected by discipline, your confidence is built through character, and your decisions are guided by principles instead of fear, you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. Your life becomes the proof. And when your purpose becomes greater than your need for approval, people naturally learn that the greatest consequence of disrespect is not your anger. It is losing the privilege of your time, your attention, and your presence.